which is a small town outside of Cardiff in Wales, and I do not support the Welsh independence movement.
Don't support Welsh independence yet. I would describe myself as being indie curious, so the idea of Welsh independence really does appeal, but I'm unsure at the moment about the economic viability of it.
I'm Morgan Taylor, a final year law student here at the University of Bristol, as well as a supporter of Indie Wales and a member of Yes Cymru.
So yes, I do support independence.
What appeals about independence is the idea that all decisions about Wales should be made in Wales, and especially with the reducing Welsh representation at Westminster due to the changing of constituency boundaries, Wales is going to have less of a voice in the very parliament that dictates how much money the Welsh devolved government will be able to have to govern.
I think one of the main reasons at the core of it is because independence is normal. I think we should be asking why not, rather than why do we support Welsh independence. I know a lot of people argue that Wales is too small or Wales is too poor, but if we look at Europe alone, there are 18 countries with a population that is smaller than Wales.
The main reasons for not supporting the movement are mainly financial. Wales is a net beneficiary of the United Kingdom's treasury, and the realities are we would just be poorer without being part of the United Kingdom. Also, I would question how nationalists would intend to leave the United Kingdom. On what terms would we leave? There is a £13 billion deficit in Welsh public finances, and so I just don't think that is economically viable for Wales to become an independent nation.
I think a large amount of my interest in the movement sprang up as I moved away from Wales. I was essentially culturally blinkered, for lack of a better term, by coming from North Wales. So we had really amazing Welsh literacy, with really amazing Welsh fluency, and all of my teaching up until GCSE was through the medium of Welsh. And I moved to Bristol and realised, obviously not everyone had the same experience as me, and that came about from talking to people in England to talking to people from South Wales, and realising that I was very fortunate in the area that I grew up in.
So I think for me personally, I think it's mainly the fact that we're just a separate nation with a separate language and culture, and I just believe in every nation's right to self-determination, basically.
I don't believe that my Welsh education has had any effect on my opinion on Welsh independence. It's not something that was ever discussed in school. Perhaps you could argue that someone who is Welsh speaking is maybe more likely to support independence, so I may have had more of more exposure to the idea than someone who would have attended English education, but there definitely has not been any direct impacts.
I think it has affected how I perceive my opinions on Welsh independence. I think one of the main reasons for this is because of the Welsh lessons, learning about Welsh literature, learning about Welsh culture, most importantly learning about the people who fought for our culture and language, who died over these issues, learning about the oppression that we have faced in terms of the Welsh Not and Tryweryn, and how I'd like to be a part of the future generation of people who fight for a better Wales for the future generations.
I think for me, I think it did make a difference to an extent, because I think we were taught about a few more things than perhaps some people who went to English medium schools might have learned, such as the drowning of the village of Capel Celyn. But I also don't think that we were taught enough, and I think we weren't really taught very much at all, and I think that this was a deliberate move by the unionists in power.
I grew up in North Wales with a really incredible Welsh curriculum, and I think that was really important for developing this idea of Welsh independence for me. Whether that was learning about Tryweryn, whether it was learning about the disaster at Aberfan, whether it was learning about the Welsh Not, I think a Welsh medium experience where you get to learn Welsh history in Welsh is incredible. It's really important, and I think it's crucial that more schools adopt that approach. Westminster's response to COVID-19 has absolutely impacted my view on Welsh independence. I mean, Wales has had a Labour government for a while now, and whilst I can't prove that the Labour government would have done things in a different, more successful way, I certainly don't like the way that the Tories have performed. I don't like Boris Johnson's approach to handling the situation.
So I do appreciate that the EU has been very helpful in areas of Wales like the valleys, but then I would question why only 5 council areas in Wales voted to remain in the EU. In terms of the Welsh Government and coronavirus, I think that a lot of people praise Mark Drakeford for some of his strategies. They were slightly stricter than they were in England, and I think some people took that as meaning that it's proof the Welsh Government can govern itself and we can be free from Westminster. Well, first of all, I think that's quite a narrow argument. Just because Mark Drakeford had some successful policies during COVID-19 does not necessarily mean that we can be an independent country free from Westminster. I would also question some of his policies. For example, the fibre-break lockdown at the end of October was disastrous. It didn't work.
I think for me it hasn't really impacted that much just because I was already in favour of independence, but I do think that both Brexit and COVID, what Westminster's response to those, has just highlighted how neglected Wales is.
The handling of the COVID-19 pandemic by the British government has definitely coloured my view on independence. It's definitely pushed me more towards being in favour of independence, just through watching the incompetence of the British government compared to the less incompetent Welsh government. That's not to say there haven't been any flaws, but there certainly have been fewer of them.
COVID and Brexit personally hasn't really affected my opinion on Welsh independence because I already supported Welsh independence before these things happened. If anything, it has reinforced what I already believed. I think people have become more politically active in general because people are learning how the devolved institutions work due to the fact that Wales is creating its own lockdown rules. The movement that is happening in Wales, I think it's very interesting to look at Scotland and where the movement has stemmed from. I think Scotland's movement has had a massive influence on what is going on here in Wales. I think what we are building is having great success. You can only see this by looking at social media. The amount of people engaging in discussions on the union, discussions on independence is increasing.
The current Welsh nationalist movement, Yes Cymru, I think has really capitalised on the failings of the British government and is really gathering a lot of momentum. The only thing I think they could do a little more of is to appeal to those people who are on the fence like me and present the economic arguments to prove whether or not Wales can be an independent, prosperous nation or not, and also to try and stray away from the nationalist, extremist kind of identity that a lot of people just hear independence and they immediately jump to that conclusion.
An incredible independence movement throughout Wales currently. The work of Yes Cymru and Adam Price and Plaid Cymru is amazing. If you can listen to any Adam Price speeches or read any of his interviews, I'd massively recommend it. It's incredible.
The United Celtic Nation is something that seems quite distant, I think, and probably not plausible. Although it would have a population of around 20 million people and it would be quite a big economy, we have to think about the realities of it happening. We would probably reignite the tensions in Ireland with the Unionists not wanting to be part of a Celtic nation.
For me, I think I'm more interested in a pro-European Wales. I think we have loads in common with the other Celtic nations, such as our language or culture, but I think it would be more beneficial for us to be an independent nation and hopefully for them to be independent too.
I don't know. It's not something I've done much reading into or research about. It's an interesting concept, right? From what I understand of the Scottish independence movement as well, so many of the calls for independence are more like a call for England to be kicked out of the Union.
In terms of the Celtic nation, I've never really thought about or really considered a united Celtic nation. I know it's something that has been discussed recently. Someone tweeted it after the Brexit discussions and there was a lot of arguments about it on Twitter. I know that Sean Jobbins has said that it's something that would be desirable for Wales, having a united Celtic nation.
A united Celtic union would be lovely. It sounds really nice, a nice union between the Celtic nations without there being a main seat of power. However, it does sound like a bit of a smaller version of the European Union, and it's perhaps a little unrealistic.